On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks are going to the playoffs after a very impressive, resilient, powerful, forceful, all those words, performance against the Miami Heat on the road on this Tuesday. The Hawks were comfortably in the lead for the large majority of this one. They faltered a little bit in the second half, but got it back quickly in pretty impressive fashion. We'll get into all of how it happened, what the takeaways are, and what's to come for Atlanta coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1450 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday, and today's show is brought to you by HelloFresh. You can skip your trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Go to HelloFresh.com/NBA60. Use the code NBA60 for 60% off, plus free shipping with HelloFresh. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast to make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And today's show, we'll be diving into a very impressive performance from the Hawks on the road in Miami, 116-105 in the play-in. The first time ever that a 7 seed has lost at home in the play-in. Admittedly, it's been a small sample size, but the Hawks were the first team to make that history as the 8 seed winning on the road in this fashion. With the victory, they have now clinched the 7 seed in the Eastern Conference. They'll take on the Boston Celtics beginning on Saturday in the best of 7 series. So we'll have plenty of talk about that, both later on in this podcast and then also later on in the week. But for the most part, we'll be focusing on this really impressive win for the Hawks. They were by 24 points late in the first half. It got a little bit dicey from there, admittedly, in pretty typical Hawks fashion in some respects this year. But in not typical fashion, they actually did not let it get away from them. They actually were pretty resilient in this game, never lost the lead. A couple of really important moments when things could have swung the other direction where the Hawks made big plays defensively in particular. And all that said, it was resilient, it was impressive, and the Hawks had one of their best performances of the entire season at a very, very good time to go ahead and do that on the road in a high-profile national TV spot with a lot of extra eyeballs on the team and a lot of questions, not in a malicious way, but a lot of people asking where this has been all year long. I had that same question. Honestly, this has been a pretty maddening season in all likelihood, and really if you watched every single game of the season, as I have, and a lot of Hawks fans have, it's been a little bit baffling why the Hawks have not done this more often. But in this game, when the lights were really bright, the Hawks played very well, and we'll focus on that for the most part on this podcast. So we'll start now with my takeaways from the game. And honestly, I'll start with the defense, but it really was a two-way win for Atlanta. The Hawks have not been great defensively this year. That obviously goes without saying. You've been watching the team a lot. And the second half of the season, when the Hawks offense has kind of found its stride, the Hawks defense has been in the bottom 5 of the league and really, really struggling. They played very, very well defensively in this game. I have to note in the transparency part of me trying to be a realist, I know I probably have some new listeners this time of year. I will always give you the candid response and analysis. And I'm not a fanboy. I'm going to give you all the context. Miami is not a good offensive team. That is worth pointing out. I talked about that a lot with my pre-game discussions with Wes Goldberg and Glenn Willis on the same podcast feed, crossovers, all that stuff. That is definitely worth keeping in mind that Miami is not good on offense. But at the same time, the Hawks have had some bad nights defensively against some shaky offenses in the recent past. And in this game, that never happened. They kept Jimmy Butler in check. They kept Bam Adebayo in check. And with the beyond the outlier performance from Kyle Lowry, who had 33 points off the bench, including 6-9 from 3 on a season when he's kind of been a non-factor on offense. If that didn't happen, the Hawks would have won this game even more comfortably. Obviously, it did happen. Tyler Hero got off a little bit in the second half as well, but the Hawks were really, really solid defensively for the majority of the evening. They held the Heat to a 109 offensive rating in the game overall. That included 43% from the floor, 33% from 3. Only forced 8 turnovers in this game. They did an excellent job on the glass. We'll come back to that in a second. And they had some foul issues early on, being a little bit too aggressive against Butler and the like in the first half, but only allowed 20 free throw attempts. That's a very good figure against this Miami team. That's strong across the board. And they were better than usual on the perimeter. There were still some issues. Obviously, I've argued repeatedly, that's been the Hawks' biggest problem all year long has been point of attack defense. But they were better. They were more in tune in this game between Trey and DeJounte and Bogey, etc. And the big guys were all very good defensively in this game. Capella was awesome. Collins was very good. Okongwu was very good. Jalen Johnson was very good. Sadiq Bey played very well defensively. DeAndre Hunter, and despite some foul trouble in this one, played well defensively. And that's their 6 guys that cover basically every minute that they have at the 4 and the 5 this season, at least when they're fully healthy. And they played very well in this game. And that was not a coincidence because the Hawks showed up on defense, and it really, really led this. For me, that was probably the bigger influence on this victory, all things considered. On offense, it was far from perfect, but it was impressive all the same. The biggest thing was the way the Hawks really outworked Miami, and that applies to the defense as well. I will raise my hand right now and admit this. I talked about the Hawks and sort of the variance that comes along with the one-game sample size. I thought the Hawks had a pretty decent chance to win this game. I wouldn't have picked them to win the game outright because, they were 5.5-point underdogs for a reason. It was a road game, etc. But if the Hawks won this game, it probably was going to be, not definitely, but probably was going to be because they had really an awesome offensive game. And usually with the Hawks, that means a lot of shooting and a lot of scoring and all that stuff. But really, the Hawks just outworked and out-physicaled and just outforced the Heat in this game. The biggest thing that shows up there is the offensive rebounding. The Hawks had a season-high 22 offensive rebounds in this game. They secured 39% of their missed shots. That is an off-the-charts figure against anyone. And now I'll throw this in there. Miami came in to the night as the number 4 team in the entire NBA in defensive rebound rate. This is an awesome defensive rebounding team. They did go small, and that was at least a big part of why the Hawks had so much success. They are not the same team as they used to be, and I talked about it a little bit with Wes and Glenn, etc., but it's worth driving home that Miami, without PJ Tucker and some of their other issues, they're not the same team, especially defensively, and especially they're just so small in some respects. But the Hawks really, really took advantage of that. They had 26-second chance points. That's a ton. The Hawks solidly won the possession battle despite having more turnovers than Miami because they just kept getting extra opportunities. Capella was the huge factor there, but it was really not just him. It was across the board. The Hawks ended up taking 5 more field goal attempts and 7 more free throw attempts than Miami in this game. And as I always say on the podcast, if you take more shots than your opponent, you are in a good position. Doesn't mean you always win, but it's a huge factor, and that can sort of overcome some bad shooting. The Hawks did not shoot well in this game. They had below average shooting efficiency overall. They were pretty good from 2, to be honest, but 24% from 3, 10 of 41. I did like, actually, the Hawks took a lot of threes in this game, and especially in the first half, the process was really good on those shots. 26 assists, not a ton, given that they had 17 in the first 16 minutes, something like that, but good stuff on the margins as well. 17 fast break points, 64 points in the paint, against a defense that's kind of built to stop those things. And 7 guys scored in double figures. It was a balanced performance. Guys played well. Trey was pretty good for the most part in this game, but it wasn't like just the Trae Young show. Same with DeJounte. The bench was awesome. They had really good balance in this one. And the only real black mark, other than some hiccups shot selection wise at times in the third quarter, was the free throw line, where they were 16 of 27. If the Hawks had lost this game, I would have been banging the drum on that's kind of maybe the reason why they would have lost this one. Capella was 0 for 4. Collins was 1 for 3. Jalen was 0 for 2, etc. So they had some missed free throws for sure that would have bit them in a closer game, but it was not that close, which was fortunate for Atlanta in this spot. And on the whole, they did exactly what they needed to do. Was it the way that I would have projected it to happen as far as how they got to scoring at a pretty good rate against Miami? No, but they made the plays, and they really used their physicality and athleticism and force to their advantage in impressive fashion. I did talk about the one-game variance aspects, but Miami being the better shooting team in this game and the Hawks winning by 11 points is pretty stunning to me, to be honest with you. It was just wildly impressive. I keep saying that, and I do mean it. We'll get into sort of the game flow aspects of this game in a second. But the Hawks come into this game as 5.5-point road underdogs for a reason against a playoff-tested opponent. And even if you were not a huge Miami believer, and I'm not, all year long I've been a little bit lower on Miami, preseason, etc. But they're still well coached. Eric Spoelstra is great. Jimmy Butler is great. Bam Adebayo is a really good player. And even with all that said, you're playing them on the road, and the Hawks played one of the best games of the season, I thought, honestly. They weren't perfect. We'll get into kind of the swoon that happened late first half, early second half to make things interesting. But defensively, it was one of their, 5, 6 best games of the season. Offensively, probably not quite that good, but certainly above average. And pairing that all together under the bright lights was more than enough to get the win. And we'll leave it there for now as far as my takeaways are concerned. But a fun night at the office, and the Hawks fans are feeling really good right now, as they definitely should be. We'll get into kind of how it happened in a second. But first, though, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. It's the coolest game I've ever played really in a long time. Like a lot of people, I grew up we're thinking about making moves around the NBA franchises, like if I was in charge. And it turns out it's not all that easy, actually, to run an NBA franchise. If you ever had the same thought that I had and pictured actually managing your own basketball franchise, go to Ultimate Pro Basketball GM and check it out right now. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and trading players and dealing with personalities with your franchise, making draft picks, generally navigating life throughout free agency, etc., and all the fun challenges of a season. This all happens in a very realistic game world, and also Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and is playable offline. You can play on the go, wherever you want to, how much as you want to, all that fun stuff. And we're already having fun behind the scenes, talking trash to each other in the Locked On NBA group chat. It's been a lot of fun so far, and definitely more to come. And you can do that same thing with your friends who are also diehard basketball fans. And if you're listening to this podcast, as you are with Locked On Hawks, get a 100% free boost to the franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. Download the game right now by visiting probasketballgm.com or scan the code to look it up in the App Store. That is probasketballgm.com. When you get there, use the promo code Locked On. Ultimate Basketball GM, start your dynasty today. All right, we'll dive in now. If you're a new listener, what we do on this segment of the podcast is go through kind of how it all happened, quarter for quarter, play-by-plays, my observations and such throughout this contest. And the Heat started small. But Jimmy Butler at the 4 plus 3 guards. The Hawks stuck with their usual starters, unsurprisingly, and that led to some size advantages for the Hawks across the board. And I thought it was pretty interesting and notable that Snyder played some different matchups defensively than I would have projected. They ended up starting out with Collins on Jimmy Butler, which actually was pretty effective, in part because there was not really anywhere else to put him. They had Hunter guard Max Strus to be more of the help guy in this game. Trey had Tyler Hero a lot, which for the most part worked until the third quarter, but even then it was generally effective. And then on the other end of the floor, it was Hero on Hunter, Strus on Collins, Butler on Murray, and then Vincent on Trae Young. The Hawks did miss their first 4 shots and fell behind a little bit at the outset, but then once Collins made a 3, they were off and running. They made 7 of their next 8 shots after missing their first 4. Murray hit 2 threes plus the Collins 3, and the Heat were 4-15 from the field. So the Hawks took a solid lead pretty much immediately and never actually lost it all the way through. Trey looked much more comfortable in this game than he did in the Miami series last year. Looked at that a lot, how much he struggled. And part of that was that there was no other options for the Hawks. I've always said that, even whilst acknowledging that Trey was not good in that series. It was not just because of him. It was because of the way that Miami was playing him and the lack of options elsewhere. But Miami was playing much more conventionally defensively in this game, much more drop coverage. And they're not quite the same team. They can't switch like they did before because they're always playing someone like Hero or Strus or Kevin Love, etc., and that limits your options. Rotationally, no big surprises. The only thing that really is notable is that Collins had foul trouble and then sat the rest of the first half because they had it going with Sadiq Bey off the bench. We'll come back to him in a second. But I thought Collins played really well defensively in the first half still. Trey had his usual mid-quarter rest. It was Jalen Johnson and Okongwu that they used their top 9. No AJ Griffin in this game. I'm not surprised by that. Generally speaking, teams do not play 10 guys in the playoffs, and AJ's kind of been in and out of the rotation in the last few weeks. When everyone's healthy, I think he's obviously the 10th of 10, and that's okay with me. Maybe he'll play against Boston. We'll get to that later on, but I was all right with the way that it all transpired. The bench was awesome in this game in general. Jalen Johnson had a pretty Jalen Johnson-like stretch where he had 3 or 4 just incredibly impressive flash plays, a nice Euro step, and then also had a really bad turnover in the backcourt. He's still very young and raw, but when he is looking good, it looks very, very good off the bench. Trey had a little bit of a dust up with Jamel McMillan off the bench, which is kind of strange at the end of the first quarter. I'm not sure what that was, whether it was just kind of a normal back and forth, but that got a lot of attention because it was Trey. I understand all that. But the Hawks were up by 9 at the end of the first quarter. They scored the ball very well in the first quarter, 36 points to 28 possessions. Did turn the ball over a bunch, but actually shot the ball extremely well early on. Later in the first half, they ran a great set for Okongwu to get deep possession on Kyle Lowry for a pretty easy bucket. That was a good design coming out of a break from Quinn Snyder. And really, the Hawks could have been up by even more. They missed some wide open looks early in the second quarter. Still up by 16 points by the middle of the quarter. They threw some zone at Miami defensively. That was very effective, I thought, throughout the early part of the second quarter. The Heat were not making shots from 3 either. And if Miami's not making threes with this current alignment, they are kind of drawing dead. Kyle Lowry did catch fire later on. But other than him, like Strus and Hero, I believe, combined to shoot 3 of 14. Martin was 0 of 2, so that's 3 of 16 combined with those guys. Kevin Love played 3 minutes, missed his only shot. So it was basically Lowry or nothing from 3-point range. And on offense, I said this earlier a little bit, but I'll just say this again now. The ball was moving beautifully in the first quarter and a half. In fact, the Hawks had 17 assists in the first 17 minutes of the game. For some context, they averaged less than 19 assists per game against Miami in the playoffs last year. They averaged more than that for the season this year. but an assist per minute is an insane ratio. It was always going to slow down, and the Hawks only had one after that the rest of the first half, so it did fall off a cliff. But the ball movement was beautiful in the first quarter and a half. And it helps to make shots, but certainly the ball was whizzing around in pretty impressive fashion. They played with the bench for a long time and with good reason. Myself and Glenn Willis talked about this a little bit on the preview show, but they spread the floor a lot with Bogey and Bay. That was a lineup that we wanted to see a lot in this game. And we thought they were going to try to do that, especially if they could hold on defense, and they were able to do that with the zone. And if you can put Bay in one corner and Bogey on the other, it's hard to guard the Hawks in a lot of ways, and that was definitely effective in that stretch. They went by 24 points with about 3 minutes to go in the first half. They were holding Jimmy and Bam in check. Clint Capella had back-to-back block shots. Miami had 39 points on 49 possessions, just a wild stretch of defense. But then, of course, Miami sort of rose from the dead a little bit. Lowry had a big run late. It was an 11-0 run by the Heat at the end of the first half. The Hawks missed 7 straight shots. Turnovers, they got impatient. I thought they tried for too many home run balls in that stretch. They kind of didn't really need to do that. They could have just laid back and been more patient. But all that said, Trey gets to the line mercifully at the end of the half to get into the break up by 15 points. But it was a missed opportunity. It probably should have been more like 20, 25 at that point in time. Still, though, the Hawks played very well for the most part. Now, in the third quarter is when it actually got dicey. Miami came out of the gate, scored their first 3 possessions, and the lead was down to 11. They finally decided to emphasize the fact that Trey was guarding Hero, and they kind of forced it to Hero pretty efficiently in that stretch. DeJounte took a pretty bad step-back 3, and things were wavering. Hunter got his 4th foul. That was a loose ball, and it was a bad decision by him to go for that loose ball. Bay had a possession where I think he missed 3 times in a row at the rim. So it was a little bit helter-skelter. They missed Hunter when he was off the floor defensively in that stretch a lot. And overall, it was a 24-6 run by Miami from when the Hawks were up by 24 when they got it all the way down to 6 with about 8 minutes to go in the third quarter. And I was a little bit wary at that point. The Hawks had blown some leads this year across the board. It got real in a hurry for Atlanta. But as I said before, it got very, very impressive that they were so resilient. Because number one, it takes a lot of effort to come back from that big of a deficit, but the Hawks were able to stop that run a few different times. Capella had a nice couple of contested the rim defensively. Trey scored 5 straight points in the third quarter when they kind of really needed that, I thought. Okongwu had a couple of huge blocks, one on Strus in that stretch. Offensive rebounding, Bay had one, Johnson had one, etc. And the Hawks were missing free throws, but they were still up by 13 points because they scored the last 6. Trey drew a foul that was beautiful at the end of the third quarter, and then a great lob from Jalen to Okongwu for a dunk at the very, very end of the third quarter. Early in the fourth was the last-stitch run from Miami. After a dunk by Jalen Johnson early in the fourth quarter, Miami made a couple threes. Okongwu did have this incredible block on Bam Adebayo that was like a total stonewalling from Onyeka, who was really good in this game. But a 13-4 run overall by Miami. Lowry was just still inexplicably red hot for the Heat, and the Hawks scored 4 points in 4 minutes. After a timeout, though, Capella had a great offensive rebound and then had a nice pass to Bogdanovic for a dunk that was really badly needed. And then Capella got an offensive rebound on the next possession. Ended up with Murray scoring. More foul trouble for Hunter, but besides that, not a whole lot else. Lowry was still hot, but other than that, like the Hawks were able to sort of wall up on them defensively. Bay had a dunk to go up by 11 with like 3:30 to go, and then Capella had another offensive rebound, another offensive rebound that led to a Murray floater to go up by 11 with about 2 minutes to go. They got to stop from there. The Hawks were in total control, and for me, like the dagger was when Collins scored to go up by 13, and that was pretty much when everyone could sort of exhale and enjoy the rest of the victory. So lots of flash plays. We'll get into all the numbers later on between the defensive stuff, the offensive stuff, the bench balance, lots of effective performances, and really not many guys, really, I would say not really anyone didn't play all that well. I think maybe Hunter's offense would be the only thing that I would point to. It was like kind of disappointed, but everything else played very well in this game. We'll get into all that in a second when it comes to our individual player evaluations. But first, one more break to hear from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here. It's also baseball season with grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays returning to our lives in earnest. And there's no better place to get on the NBA or MLB action than at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're a new customer, get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 with FanDuel, and it's bonus bets coming back to you if your first bet does not win with FanDuel. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app right now. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use, but anything you're looking for, including point spreads and totals and money lines and futures, player props, and much more. The Hawks, of course, are now going into the playoffs, opening up on Saturday against Boston. They'll have the whole slate of offerings on the series, on Game 1, etc. at FanDuel, and you can also combine bets together for a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get the no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon, official sportsbook partner of the NBA and MLB. All right, we'll close with the player evaluations in this game and plenty to celebrate for Atlanta. So we'll start with the bench, and everyone was good off the bench in this game. It's been a theme for a while. It wasn't quite as stark in this game that it was just the bench driving the success, because in the second half, maybe like the last third of the season, the bench has been the stronger unit. But this game, everyone was good, and the bench was certainly part of that. We'll start with Jalen, who played 14 minutes. I was the lowest of anyone on the roster, but had 10 points, 3 steals, 3 assists, 7 rebounds, 5-8 from the floor. It was a vintage Jalen Johnson performance in the fact that he made so many flash plays in positive fashion. He also had 3 turnovers, had some mistakes for sure, but you can live with that because he's such an impactful guy when he has it going. He makes these athletic plays at 6'9", 6'10", with so much range. He fills the game very well, the passing, the steals, etc. He made a huge impact. It was a small amount of minutes, but he played very well off the bench. Okongwu, same thing. He played excellently. Less mistakes than Johnson, I would say, but 12 points, 4 rebounds, 4 blocks in 20 minutes for Neka. Had 3 assists, 5-6 on the floor. Everyone is tempted for whatever reason to kind of always pick Capella and Okongwu against each other. They were both excellent in this game in different ways. For Clint, it was rebounding and rim protection. For Okongwu, it was just flying around, being what he is, which is this highly versatile defensive piece who's also really great touch on offense. He played excellent basketball in this one. Bogdanovic looked good. Didn't shoot it all that well. Only 2 of 8 from 3, but was 3 of 3 on 2s. Had 2 assists, 2 steals, 14 points. I said this before. I know my friend Andrew Kelly said this during the game as well. It's worth reminding everyone, when Bogey is himself and when Bogey is able to move, more importantly, with his legs and his knees feeling good, he makes a huge difference on this team. Not only the spacing, that's definitely a huge part of this, but just the secondary creation on offense, being a threat, giving them spacing. He played very well, even without making a ton of shots in this one. And then Saddiq Bey, I thought was awesome, honestly. He didn't shoot well either. He was 4 of 8 on 2s, 3 of 9 on 3s, so only 17 points on 17 shots. That isn't great, but a lot of that was off of his own misses. I think he had 2 or 3 offensive rebounds that he missed back and forth. But he had a block. He did the little things defensively. He played well. Sadiq's defense when he first arrived was really an adventure, and I think he still has some weaknesses defensively for sure. He falls asleep sometimes off the ball, but he's gotten better. He's been dialed in. He's competitive and he's physical. That's a big thing about Saddiq Bey, is that he does have great physical stature. He's not the quickest guy or the longest guy, but he definitely does play hard. And that showed up here. Made a lot of little plays, and then as a floor spacer, again, putting Bey on one side and Bogan on the other makes life easier for Trey and DeJounte. To the starters in this one, Hunter had the quietest game on offense, 6 points on 9 shots. He's probably the only guy who I thought struggled on offense in this game, but a lot of it was foul trouble, 6 rebounds, 2 assists. But even then, and I'll get this, I'll say this now, my friend Tyler Jones, a frequent guest on this podcast, the voice of the Hawks fan in some respects, not the biggest Hunter fan in the world, even he acknowledged that they missed his defense in this game. When he was in foul trouble, the Hawks were not quite the same team defensively. I thought it was a good move by Snyder, not one that I thought of necessarily, to have Hunter not be primarily on Butler in this game, because they were able to use his off-ball stuff, which Glenn's been talking about this a lot recently as well, is very, very solid. And I thought he just did the little things well in this game. Rebounded the ball pretty well, had 2 assists. He had probably the best pass I've ever seen him throw, honestly, in this game for a nice assist. So he wasn't great, but he didn't play badly either and did the little things effectively. John Collins had foul trouble in the first half, so played less than he usually would, 22 minutes in this one, but 10 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, played really good defense, ended up with 4 fouls, 1 of 4 from 3, 3 of 4 on 2s, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. I thought he was fine, just kind of rock solid. Didn't do anything just ridiculously well, but just did his job in this one. Played good defense, finished around the rim. Had 2 big finishes late. There was one floater when the Hawks, I think, were only up by 7 or maybe 9 late. It was kind of a pseudo dagger. Nice important shot from John, but I thought he was just a solid B+ in this one. We'll go to Murray now. 18 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. A couple of 4 shots, as you're going to want to live with DeJounte, but a couple of big ones too. Had one nice kind of 8-foot, sort of a pull up, but not really, kind of almost a floater range shot late. That was a big shot to kind of put things away for Atlanta, and made some good plays. I think defensively was better than he's usually been this year in this game. Not great necessarily, but still fine, and played fine enough. Trae Young had one kind of really bad stretch, I thought, at one point late in the first half, but other than that, played well. 25 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists. I will not just say that this is everything with the Miami struggles is now gone, because he wasn't perfect in this one, but he was very effective. His passing is always fantastic. Got to the line 9 times. He was 7 of 10 on 2s. Still 1 of 8 on 3s. He's not shot the ball well for a little while now. It's a little bit of a concern in advance of the Miami series, but I thought that Trey, generally speaking, played well. He competed on defense, And aside from in the third quarter when Heater got him a couple times in a row, he was not a huge liability there either, and made the plays they had to make. And good to see Trey kind of get that monkey off his back, at least for one night against Miami. And then finally, Clint Capella, who I thought was awesome. People that listen to this podcast regularly will know I am a pretty big zealot for Capella. I think he's a very good player who is often underrated in the way that he's discussed. I thought he was arguably their best player in this game. I thought he was that good. Some people that I trust nationally watching this game had the same feedback. Just that Clint was like basically terrorizing Miami in this one on defense. And yes, he missed all 4 free throw attempts. That does matter. He's not a good free throw shooter. We all kind of know that. And yes, he had 4 points. And it's possible to dominate a game with 4 points. And it happened in this game if you watch Capella back. Even more so on the replay, Clint's defense was fantastic in this one, plus the rebounding. So 4 points, yes. 21 rebounds, 8 offensive, 13 defensive, had 2 blocks in 28 minutes. It wasn't like he played 38 minutes. 28 minutes, 21 rebounds, and just walling off the rim all the time, stopping Jimmy at the rim, stopping Bam at the rim, stopping anybody at the rim, really. Just kind of just being that force around the rim. And then obviously rebounding-wise, he is arguably the best rebounder in the entire league, certainly in the top 5 comfortably, and that was shining in this game offensively and defensively. So I won't go crazy. He's not Embiid, he's not Jokic, but I said this before, the Hawks have, aside from those teams that have Embiid and Jokic, I would argue the Hawks have arguably the best 48 minutes of center play in the entire league. This is a great example. Okongwu was really good. Clint was really good. They had a really good center on the floor for 48 minutes tonight. That was a huge factor in the Hawks getting this win. So we'll leave it there for now. But again, basically everyone played well. That's obviously not a bad thing if you're trying to get a road win against a team that is perceived to be better than you are. And we'll leave it there for now. But again, one more time on the way out, the Hawks played great in this game. It was fun to watch. I'm sure it was frustrating for Hawks fans as well, that they are capable of so much more than they've been this year. I've said it a million times, but they have underachieved this year. No question about it. They weren't necessarily banged up with injuries. And for this team to be 41-41 is disappointing. But having their best game, maybe not their absolute best game, but certainly in the top 5 best performances all year long, and doing it in the play-in, on the road, national TV, all that, is nice. It's good to take the opportunity to be a little bit happy about that performance. You can be back to frustration later on this week, and we'll do plenty of previewing of the Boston series. But it was a good night for the Hawks overall. Everyone should be fired up about all of that. If you're wondering, I did a little bit of Trae Young talk at the end of the crossover episode that I posted with Wes Goldberg. He asked me about it on Monday afternoon into Tuesday. I'm going to hold off on any of that until now. I have a roundup of that. Spoiler alert, my thoughts are that they're not going to trade Trae Young. That's my guess at this point. It's a pretty educated guess, and we'll leave that there for now. From there, we get into the fact that the Hawks will go on the road and play the Celtics in Game 1 on Saturday. We already know it's a 3:30 afternoon game, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on the road in Boston. It's the second game of the playoffs. So the playoffs begin on Saturday with 4 games. Then they are 4 games on Sunday as well. The Hawks are the second game on the agenda. The first game is Nets-Sixers in Philly, and then it's Boston opening up that series, Game 1 against the Hawks. So we know when that's going to be, obviously. It's a big win for the Hawks, obviously, tonight for clear reasons, but not only guaranteeing a playoff spot, but also getting a few days to prepare. I'll say this now. We'll have plenty more preview content later on this week, probably at least a couple of shows between now and tip-off on Saturday. But one of the sneaky disadvantages of being in the last play-in game, where the Hawks were last year when they had to win twice to get out, is that you're on short rest. If the Hawks had lost today, they'd be playing on Friday night in Atlanta, and they'd have to go to Milwaukee for Sunday. That's a quick turnaround when you just play 2 games with high stakes. Now, you get Wednesday off, Thursday off, Friday off. That's nice. Yes, you have to go to Boston. Obviously, they're going to be more well-rested than you, but honestly, it might even be a small advantage because Boston hasn't played a game that mattered in a while. They played Sunday, yes, against the Hawks, in a game that was totally meaningless to everybody. So they haven't played a competitive game in a week when you get there. So anyway, the Hawks will be underdogs in the series. I'm not going to lie to anybody on the podcast about that. No one's going to pick the Hawks. No one is going to pick the Hawks in the series. And we'll preview that later on. But I think the Hawks are certainly capable of more than they've been this year. When they play well, as we saw tonight, they're difficult to beat. And can they be competitive in the series? I think absolutely. So we'll get into all of that more later on this week. But that's sort of your appetizer for now on a great night for the Hawks. And Saturday awaits, as the Hawks are guaranteed now at least 2 more home games as well. So if you were an Atlanta resident, you wanted to go ahead and get some ticket stuff fired up. Game 3, Game 4 are happening in the near future as well. If you are looking for playoff scheduling and things, I will just wrap that up at the end of the podcast here because I believe I have it. I'm looking for it now as I'm live on the podcast. It's probably a bad idea to go ahead and do that. But, scheduling is tough this time of year. It's one of those things. Oh, by the way, our friends at FanDuel, I should say this now because they actually have a number on this. The Hawks are going to be, at least right now, 8-point underdogs in game one. So that's pretty notable. Bigger spread than it is tonight. We've not seen the schedule yet so far for the rest of the series. So my apologies on that. But we do know this: Saturday, 3:30, ESPN. Tune in, and we'll have much more later on this week. So please subscribe to this podcast. If you are a new listener, welcome aboard. We do appreciate you joining the show. Don't go anywhere. And by the way, once the season ends, I'm still going to be here. Off-season wise, transactions, draft stuff, free agency, all of that, player evaluations, etc. We'll be here for all of that stuff as well. So please subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, also on YouTube, Google Play, etc. Ratings, reviews, likes, all that. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Also follow my written work on the Hawks, patreon.com/BT Rowland as well. I do appreciate everyone listening to the podcast. I'm sure I've ranted and raved and gone long on this Tuesday, but stay tuned with more to come, and we'll see you all later on in the week.